It's so good to be with you this morning, beloved congregation of a beloved colleague. Reverend Tim and I studied for ministry together and did hospital chaplaincy, learned our chaplaincy work together at Mass General Hospital many moons ago, so it's very good to be with you this morning. The angels in Sandra Sasso's story were right, weren't they? Given the power of memory and forgetting, we have a terrible tendency to remember the things we should forget and forget the things we should remember. Most of us living in our fast-paced world are always in some level of anxiety about forgetting, which Billy Collins points to so well in his poem. I know that my addled and often overtaxed brain has managed to let slip some very important things. Picking up my children, not just my own, but others as well. The birthday of a close friend. Nearly everything about algebra, which I once was quite good at. As we approach and live in middle age and late life, each forgotten thing brings a new level of anxiety. Hanging on to painful memories can be devastating as well. We can dwell in the pain, remembering a hurt so deeply and fully that we lose ourselves to that memory, unable to let it go. Between the challenge of forgetting those things we should remember and letting ourselves forget the things we're better off without, lies a complicated landscape of brain chemistry, moral reasoning, and the demands of right relationship and justice. Never forget, read so many of the bumper stickers commemorating the 10th anniversary of September 11th. There was a power and a rawness to those two words in that context. Just reading "never forget" next to 9/11 sent me to where I was and how I felt when I heard and saw the news. Did it happen to you too? Those two words were a powerful slogan associated with many significant and traumatic world events. Never forget. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel writes, "We remember Auschwitz and all that it symbolizes because we believe that, in spite of the past and its horrors, the world is worthy of salvation. And salvation, like redemption, can be found only in memory." The kind of memory that Wiesel writes about as linked to salvation being wholeness, healing, a bringing together of what is broken. The memory of which he speaks is one that keeps the truth of an experience, a historical event, alive in order to learn from it in the future. We want to keep from forgetting the Holocaust because embedded in that horrific experience were uncomfortable truths about the human capacity to do evil. Uncomfortable truths we don't want too easily to relegate to a particular time and place, as if they aren't possible in any time and place. So memory, as Wiesel sanctifies it, is a key to justice-making, as wrongdoers are held accountable and reparations are made to victims. Memory in this case is a way to keep the path of human goodness and be realistic about how difficult that path is. And still, never forget, as it's applied in many situations where terrible things have happened, can also keep us bound in a single way of interpreting a story. It can make us forget the multiple truths that are part of every story. Over time, we can narrow the possible ways of interpreting a story so that good and evil, right and wrong, victim and perpetrator become two-dimensional cutouts, separated in time and space from the fullness of events, the fullness of human complexity. I don't know if you were as engrossed in the stories that accompanied the commemoration of the September 11th attacks as I was. As I heard most of the accounts on the radio, as NPR did a series on how people's lives had been changed by the terrorist attacks, the stories were wide and varied, and I rarely listened to one that didn't move me to tears with its tragedy, its loss, and the human triumph of new love and new life found even in the midst of it. But what struck me most about the stories that were chosen to be told in many of our media recollections was that they focused on the very individual, personal experiences of those who were directly impacted. There was very little coverage of what we as a nation have learned about the relationships of global import that we have nurtured or repaired, the ways we might move into a more secure existence, not through vengeance, but through honoring our connections and responsibility to a global whole. We can become so wrapped up in a story of ourselves as blameless victims or miraculous survivors that we forget there's a larger story that a tragic event is woven into. A story of world political and economic power and its imbalance, a story of desperation and a desire for self-determination. Contrary to Elie Wiesel's powerful notion, there are times and ways in which memory can be something that can inhibit salvation, can get in the way of wholeness. I would dare say that most of us have ventured into that place where we've crossed the line between nursing a wound and making an idol of it, where our desire to see the person who wronged us reprimanded has ventured away from a natural desire for justice and into a desire to see them suffer. When we dwell too deeply in our memory of being wronged, we can become so invested in our role as victims that we not only forget the complexity of the one who caused the injury, we lose our own agency and sense of responsibility as well. Theologian Miroslav Volf was living in the former Yugoslavia with his American wife in the 1980s when his compulsory military service requirement came due. During his time in the army, he was detained and persecuted by his own military. Held for months for questioning under deep psychological distress and unable to communicate with his wife or family, unaware of what his supposed crimes had been, he was eventually released as inexplicably as he had been detained and returned to what should have been a normal life, except that he was haunted by the memories of those interrogations, the face of his persecutor, and the challenge of trusting anyone in authority ever again. In his book, The End of Memory, Remembering Rightly in a Violent World, Volf asks what his responsibility is to the military officer who psychologically tormented him for months. As a Christian, Volf arrives at the conclusion that his responsibility to love his neighbor extends even to that officer, even though he absolutely does not want it to. Being able to love that officer, not in the sense of having a warm feeling toward him, but in the sense of honoring his humanity and not bearing him any ill will, was essential for Volf's own spiritual well-being. Understanding that it's not possible to turn memory on and off like a faucet, Volf makes the powerful argument that the justice we often seek by holding on to memories and wrongs done to us actually can be thwarted by our clinging to those memories too closely. We can't meet the truth of what happened or the complexity of the human situation if we've carved a deep crevice into which we build a single story. We can't come to healing, wholeness, salvation if we're not willing to move past that point of injury. The making of justice ultimately belongs to something greater than us all. Some would name it God. Creating further divisions between humans as creatures of God doesn't ultimately serve the cause of justice. This is one of the places where I think Christian theology neatly ties in with Buddhist understandings as well. For many Buddhists, that understanding that life is suffering requires a sense of equanimity toward all beings. We just can't take life personally. The desire for revenge is an attachment to something that doesn't belong to us and ultimately takes us away from the goal of harmony with the deepest part of existence. Buddhists wouldn't speak of God, but the result is the same. The injury, that memory of wrongdoing, the feelings about it have to be given over in order to release the attachment, in order to feel ourselves whole and one. I'm drawn to that notion of God not being separate from us and far away, but as a force, a presence that's within and among all of us. The power of connection, that force of love, not love as sentiment, but of justice that makes life possible. If that's the case, I wonder how far we might get if we took that story of God creating memory and forgetting to heart and left it to God to do the remembering. What if the seeds of memory planted in the souls of all people could be harnessed as the way that God remembers? Community and the power of our intentional connection could hold the memories that individuals can't bear alone. God could move in and through us for healing. What if forgetting didn't necessarily mean forgiving, but rather not letting ourselves be held hostage to our pain? And what if forgiveness was something we sought and offered in community, only after appropriate reparations were made? What if we took seriously our own role as bearers of that sacred spirit, as agents of God's will, and took communal responsibility for holding one another's pain, for taking the hurt and the memory of it in a way that can both honor its power and limit its damage at the same time? My friends, I'd like us to consider the power of letting go, of forgetting the grievances we carry, especially the big ones, and letting them be held by the larger spirit of God, of community, of the universe, of Brahman, all present in and through our neighbors. Let us consider giving over those hurts in order to let ourselves humbly and simply be freed to love our neighbors as fellow travelers on this journey of life. Let us free ourselves for the power of deep connection with all beings, with life itself, by untying ourselves from victimhood and recommitting ourselves to the work of justice with and for all. May we use our memory to return us to who we are, the possibility born in each of us for forgiveness, for life made new in the power of love. The love which, as Cornel West says, in private looks like tenderness, but in public looks like justice. So may it be. Amen.